There have been many cases where people shortly before passing over appear to see or recognise deceased relatives or friends. In other cases, the dying person has seen a relative or friend unaware that they have actually died, believing they were still alive. This is known as deathbed visions. In many cases, a person may be dying when all of a sudden they look up and in some cases suddenly sit upright and gaze at a vacant space in the room with an astonished expression on their face that can occasionally turn to joy. It can happen in the instant where they are actually in the process of dying, with their eyes wide open as they stare at the unknown sight. In the late 19th century, Reverend J.S. Pollock of Birmingham, UK, published a collection of cases of what he termed supernormal phenomena. One case took place in a hospital where a Florence Barrett was urgently contacted by the resident medical officer by the name of Dr. Phillips, where she was to go to the bedside of a Mrs. Doris Brown, who was in labour and suffering from serious heart failure. When Florence Barrett arrived, she could see that the baby had been delivered safely, but the mother was dying. As she entered the ward, Mrs. Brown held out a hand and thanked her for what she had done and asked whether it was a boy or girl. She then asked her not to leave and at the same time said, "Oh, it's getting dark. Don't let it get dark." Suddenly the mother looked towards the corner of the room and her face lit up. "Oh, lovely, lovely," she said. She was asked, "What is lovely?" "What I saw," she responded. "What do you see?" "Lovely brightness, wonderful being," she said, and she was totally absorbed by her vision. She then focused her attention on one particular place and exclaimed with a joyous cry, "Why, it's Father! I can see Father! He wants me! He's so lonely!" She then spoke to her father, saying, "I'm coming. Oh, he's so near. Oh, he's so glad I'm coming. He's so glad. If only my husband could come too." Her baby was then handed to her, and she looked at it with interest, and then said, "Do you think I ought to stay for baby's sake?" Then she turned back towards the vision and said, I can't stay. If you could see what I do, you would know I can't stay." She then turned to her husband, who had just walked into the room, and said, "You won't let the baby go to anyone who wouldn't love him, will you?" She then gently pushed him to one side and said, "Let me see the lovely brightness." She then exclaimed, "Why, that's Father with my sister Vida." Vida was a sister who had died 3 weeks previously, but she had not been told about it as it would have distressed her. The mother lived for another hour and retained to the last the bright form she could see in the room. The next case was recorded by Dr. Hislop, PhD, who was Professor of Ethics and Logic in Columbia University, New York. Dr. Hislop was initially a skeptic and severe critic of anything related to psychical research, but later became convinced of the importance of the subject and resigned his chair to devote the rest of his life to the investigation of psychical phenomena. In this particular case, Jenny was 8 years of age and her friend Edith was slightly older. They were schoolmates and very close friends. In June 1889, both girls were taken ill suffering from diphtheria, and at noon on a Wednesday, Jenny died. The parents of Edith thought it best they kept the bad news from their daughter, fearing the bad news could be detrimental to her health. However, on Saturday, June the 8th, Edith had sent 2 photos of herself to Jenny, shortly before becoming unconscious, and asked 2 of her carers to say goodbye, but unfortunately Edith died at 6:30 p.m. on Saturday, June the 8th. Shortly before she died, she bid her friends goodbye and spoke about dying and seemed to have no fear, and appeared to have seen another of her friends she knew who had died. Then, suddenly, with a look of surprise, she turned to her father and said, "Why, Papa, I'm going to take Jenny with me." And then she added, "Why, Papa, you did not tell me that Jenny was here?" And immediately reached out her arms as if in welcome and said, "Oh, Jenny, I'm so glad you're here." Then a short time later, she too passed. The next case was reported by the Vicar of Hemel Hempstead in southern England, who in 1870, on November the 2nd and 3rd, had tragically lost his 3-year-old and 4-year-old sons David and Harry to scarlet fever. The first child to pass was Harry, who died at Abbots Langley, which was a short distance from the vicarage, on November the 2nd, and David died the following day, 14 miles away. About an hour before David died, he sat up in bed and pointed to the bottom of the bed, exclaiming, "There is little Harry calling for me." Their father said that the news of Harry's death was kept quiet from his brother David, so that he had no idea that his brother had already passed. A nurse at the time said that at the time David had sat up in bed, he was not delirious, but wide awake. The next case was reported by the Reverend J.A. MacDonald, where Mr. John Alkin Ogle had died at Leeds, UK, on July 17, 1879. About 1 hour before he died, he saw his brother Joseph, who had died 16 years before. Shortly before dying, John had looked up with intrigue and said, "Joe," and then immediately after said in total surprise, "George Hanley." His mother was with him at the time and said how strange he should see George Hanley, as George had died only 10 days previously. John had not known about George Hanley's death. The next case was given by Dr. Paul Edwards and was actually published in a journal called Light in April 1906. Dr. Edwards, who had been living in a small Californian town in 1987, was called to treat a woman suffering from consumption. Unfortunately, the woman was dying, and shortly before her death had called to her children to kiss them and say her goodbyes. She then called to her husband Newton, saying that she was no longer in pain and was quite serene. "I must go now, as I can see people moving, all in white, and the music is strangely enchanting. Oh, here's Sadie, and she's with me. She knows who I am." Her daughter Sadie had died 10 years previously. Her husband thought she was delirious. She then said, "I'm going away now and will not come back, even if you call me." It appears that the dying mother was viewing two worlds at the same time, as she was describing moving figures in the other world to the people in the room.